Good evening. I'm Elsa Smith-Gall, Senior Curator at the Phillips Collection, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live-streamed program, a conversation between Bethany Collins and Mollye Bendell. This program is held in conjunction with our special exhibition, Jacob Lawrence, The American Struggle, which features Jacob Lawrence's Reunited Struggle series alongside works by three contemporary artists, Bethany Collins, as well as Derek Adams and Hank Willis Thomas. As part of the exhibition, we are pleased to have the opportunity to highlight Bethany Collins' moving, immersive sound installation, America, a Hymnal, the very setting of our live stream with you this evening. A native of Montgomery, Alabama, Bethany Collins lives and works in Chicago, Illinois. She is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice mines language, spoken word, song, and coded messages to explore American history and the nuance of racial and national identities. Collins received an MFA in Drawing and Painting from Georgia State University in Atlanta and a BA in Studio Art and Visual Journalism from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Her work's been featured in numerous solo museum exhibitions, including at the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, Birmingham Museum of Art, Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis, the Frist Art Museum, and Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, among others. And this September, she'll be featured in an exhibition at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art with her America, a Hymnal. Collins has received widespread recognition, earning Art Adia Award Chicago, Artist Fellowship Award from the Illinois Arts Council, the Paulette Krasner Foundation Grant, and the Hutchins Prize. She previously served as the Public Humanities Practitioner in Residence at Davidson College, as well as an Artist in Residence at the MacDowell Colony and the Studio Museum in Harlem. Bethany Collins will be in conversation with Mollye Bendell. Bendell's artistic practice explores the intangible nature of electronic media as a metaphor for exploring vulnerability, visibility, and longing in a world that can feel isolating. She has recently been an artist in residence at Wave Farm, WGXC, the Harvest Works Digital Media Arts Center, and the Tides Institute and Museum of Art. Her solo work has been exhibited in venues such as the Baltimore Museum of Art, the New York Electronic Arts Festival, and Maryland Arts Place. Bendell also serves as a lecturer at our academic partnering institution, the University of Maryland. She holds a BA in sculpture from the Glasgow School of Art and an MFA in Intermedia and Digital Arts from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She lives and works in Baltimore, Maryland. Our program will begin with a PowerPoint presentation by Bethany Collins, followed by a moderated conversation with Mollye Bendell. And finally, a wrap-up with some questions and answers from you, our wonderful audience. So please feel free to participate in the chat throughout the conversation and put all your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. And now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to turn it over to Bethany Collins.
Thank you. I'm good. So it's nice to be here. Thanks for coming all the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's good, and thanks for having me back. So I came down for the opening, but it's nice to be back in the space one more time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about both the works in the exhibition, but also to give them a bit of context in my broader practice. All of the work is language-based. Language is the subject of the work. It's also the primary material out of which I'm working. And I found over time that it is also a prism through which to interrogate any other topic in the world. If you can show me a good dictionary from a particular decade, I think there's nothing that you can't learn about what we value as a people, what we value and what we don't value, from what's included in the text, from what words are included and what words we let go of, and also for how we contextualize our language. So I wanted to start with America, a Hymnal. So this is one of the first works that I made after the 2016 presidential election. And America, a Hymnal is based on 100 versions. These are called contrafacta, 100 versions of My Country 'Tis of Thee that were written from the 18th to the 20th centuries. So this used to be a much more common early American practice, where you would keep the melody of a well-known familiar song consistent, and then you would rewrite the lyrics for different political causes, social political. So My Country 'Tis of Thee was rewritten for the suffrage movement, prohibition, and temperance, lots of those, probably the most. And then also the abolitionists had their version of My Country 'Tis of Thee, as did the Confederate Army. And so the most interesting versions to me are the ones that are in opposition to one another. This patriotic hymn that is supposed to make us feel like we belong together, when it gets rewritten and is in opposition, then it feels as though it fails to achieve its purpose, but it also reveals something about who we really are. So I bound 100 versions of the My Country 'Tis of Thee together into one hymnal, so they must forever abide one another in contradiction and tension. And then I burned the musical notation away, so that what made them feel as though they belonged together, what was holding them in unity, is gone, and all that is left are 100 differences and 100 different ways to think about what it means to be American, in utter disagreement and disarray. What I also still like about this hymnal, which is also at the heart of the installation here, what I like about the hymnal is that it falls apart, that the more you read the text and turn the pages, that burned absence of the notes actually start to cling together page by page. And so the turning of the page and the participation in trying to read or to sing the hymnal means that the pages cling together and they get messier and messier and they jumble up, and eventually it leads to its own destruction, hopefully. I think there are some institutions that put it, of course, under a vitrine and it will stay super perfect forever. And then there are some private collections and institutions that allow it to be turnable by the public or by whoever owns the work. And my romantic imagination is that there will at least be one 25 years from now that is utterly illegible and just a hot mess. And that feels also like democracy, right? So I wanted to show you, since we can't actually, part of the exhibition or the installation here at the Phillips is the sound piece. I wanted to show you, or let you hear a little bit of a snippet from that sound work from America Hymnal. These images are from a performance or a singing of the hymnal that was at Mee's Chapel. It's called the God Box in Chicago. I think Mee's actually, the signage out front of the chapel says that he toured all of the Gothic chapels around Chicago before building his own, and then decided that he didn't want people looking up in this kind of worshipful attitude. He wanted people to only be able to see, face one another. And so you have to sit facing other people. It's all you've got is each other. So the performance happened there. It's also based on, so I grew up in Alabama in a Presbyterian church, Emmanuel Presbyterian, and we used to do these 48-hour Bible readings. Alabama, 48-hour Bible readings, Deep South. People still do this with the Odyssey, but we would sign up for an hour, day or night. You would go and pick up where the last person left off reading from the text and hope that the next person relieved you from your post at 4 a.m. or you just kept reading. Usually there was nobody in the pew, usually, but the idea was that even if no one was listening, that this sacred text was worthy of being read back into the world. The same for the Odyssey, worthy of being spoken back into the world. And so that was the idea for the singing of the performances as well, that open call, anyone can come and sing from the hymnal, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. Anyone can come and sing because this sacred secular text is worthy of being sung back into the world. So I'm hoping this plays well so that you can hear a little bit of what's happening in the audio piece for America Hymnal.
Light in your hands, secure, peace, nice way. Maintain, think
think of the cruel chain, endure no more the pain of slavery. Why should a tyrant bind a cultivated mind by reason well refined, ordained free?
A nation's eyes joyous day when a storm crowds where thirsty man shall.
So the idea for the piece was that sitting in the middle of the room, you would hear all 6 voices singing America, or My Country 'Tis of Thee. And they're all singing different versions at the same time. And so if you stand under any one speaker, maybe the song becomes clear, but in the middle of the room, it's utter chaos. It's familiar because the tune is still well known, but all these 100 versions singing at the same time should feel unsettling and a bit alien and foreign intentionally. The same is true for the Star-Spangled Banner, which was created after America, a Hymnal. The blue here is the same as the Presbyterian hymnal that I grew up with. And you can see a bit of the residue from the burning and also from the turning of the pages that still clings to the text and is usually scooped up at the end of the exhibition and placed back into the text as well. And then a little audio from the Star-Spangled Banner here as well. This is 8 abolitionist versions of the Star-Spangled Banner, including, well, they're also transposed from this major key, bombastic battle song into minor key and mournful versions that you would play or will play at the end of every hour when the piece is shown. So at the end of things, as it falls apart, like this is what I imagine it sounds like.
Oh, say, can you see by freedom's clear light a stain on the banner that's over you flying, which enshrouds the bright stars in the blackness of night, and proclaims to the world that your liberty's dying.
And then a few other works to give context to what's happening in the studio more recently. So in 1987, Edie Hirsch writes a text called Cultural Literacy, Things Every American Should Know. And in the back of the text, it's like an instant national bestseller, a little bit controversial. But in the back of the text, there's a list, an index of 5,000 things that according to Hirsch, if we all know these things, then we will feel like we belong together in this place. But of course, it's one man's, from the 80s, one white man's version of what it means to be American. And so it leaves out some things and includes others that my list maybe would have not. But in that list of 5,000 things, there's 9 patriotic songs that are listed. And so I made a painting for each of the 9 songs. The first is My Country 'Tis of Thee, and the red of the panel matches the red of the hymnal. And then what looks like kind of these snow flurries or land masses, something, is actually a particular lyric that's extracted from the song and then rewritten over and over again until it becomes illegible noise. So in this case, the lyric from My Country 'Tis of Thee is Thy Name I Love, written over and over again. First in the back of the painting, kind of in that, I know we do whiteboards now, but in that chalkboard-like way, punishing kind of way. And then on top, that deconstruction of the text. The first work, of course, is white noise, and then ever after, the text switches from white chalk to black charcoal. White noise is like TV static. Blue noise is like an egg in a, blue noise is like an egg in a frying pan. And then red noise, people tend to listen to that, or Brownian noise to fall asleep at night. It's like a waterfall, frequencies of noise. Black noise is pure silence. So not only does the text become illegible, it cannot be read, it cannot be sung, it also cannot be heard, it is pure silence. And so the thing that should make us feel like we belong together becomes all the more impossible. So the song here is America the Beautiful, and the lyric is Who More Than Self? The lyric for me is always chosen because it feels like it belongs in a love song to have and to hold from This Is My Country versus patriotic national anthem. And then for me, it becomes or reveals a kind of complicated relationship to patriotism. Supermarital language, right? To have and to hold. This is a detail from the work, so you can just see the tiny letters that are being handwritten over and over again. This is I Am For You from You're a Grand Old Flag. Who would have thought that this love language could come from You're a Grand Old Flag? I also substituted 2 of the works from Hirsch's list, from his 5,000 Things list. One was Lift Every Voice and Sing, which feels like it should have been included in the list. And then also Amazing Grace, I think, was not included. I took out Over There. It's a World War II song, World War I song, war song, and there's not a lot of love language in it. It's literally like over there, over there, over there. That's all that's what it is. I said this in Philadelphia at a talk, and I got a lot of pushback about the removal of that song from the list, but it's my work, so I took it out. Another piece that feels like it's a chorus of a different kind. So this is Do You Know Them from 1898. So these works are based on classified ads that were published in African American newspapers a little bit before the end of the Civil War, all the way up until the 1920s. And there's a really great scholarship by Heather Williams about this. I think the book is called Can You Help Me to Find My People? And she writes about the publishing of these. Oftentimes people would publish one ad in the hope of being reunited with their loved ones. So formerly enslaved people were publishing these ads in the hope of reunification. And sometimes people would post, annually, all the way up until, not until the 1920s, but sometimes quite frequently, became a kind of a ritual. As I noticed that as you get into the 1920s, it's usually more ads. They're more kind of about legal measures, like can you help me to find someone's daughter so that we can hand down their estate, right? But before that, the language all the way up until the turn of the century they're very much love letters. It's like everything that you can remember about your loved one in the hopes of reunification. So names, but also nicknames and other nicknames, depending on who you were telling and who people would know you by. Former owners and plantations, the last place I saw you, any kind of identifying marks and scars that might help someone to see you and to foster that reunification. What's also interesting about these ads is that not everybody got the paper, not everybody could read. And so a lot of times ministers would read them from the pulpits at the end of a service. And so what's interesting about the ads, and this becomes the chorus of the work, I think, is that people read how others are asking for their loved ones, or they hear it, and they start to repeat the same kind of phrasing. So it's hard to see, but at the top of this ad, the text, which is blind embossed, says, "Do you know them?" That becomes a kind of chorus throughout a lot of the ads. Do you know them? Have you seen her? I last saw him in Mississippi. Can you help me to find my people? Will the ministers of the South please read this from your pulpits? That becomes this refrain throughout the work. I made this series of works, and they're series because they're all from the 1890s. So after Reconstruction and the sabotage of Reconstruction, and what's considered the nadir of race relations in the US, like when it gets the worst for us, that people are still looking for their loved ones, and that lineage or that line of love continues. But I made this work after the family separation crisis at the border, and so the emboss process, so I take the ad, which is digitized, and then reprint it, engrave it into a plexi plate backwards. And then you soak the paper, place the paper over the engraved backward text, run it under this tremendous amount of pressure of the press, and it forces that wet paper into the grooves of the text. So when you pull it up, that text is actually protruding from the surface of the page. It's like a blind, inkless printing process. It's printed, and so it's like a braille, it's there. It desires to be touched, to be understood, but it's also, there's nothing there, right? It's just the paper itself. I complete that process then twice, soaking the paper, placing it on the plate, running it through the press, re-registering it, doing it all over again. And the second time the paper falls apart. And so making the work after and in reference to the family separation crisis, it's like the paper doesn't hold up the second time you do a thing. The second time you repeat your mistakes, the institution doesn't hold as well. What I also like about the work, though, is that it doesn't hold as well, but like after it falls apart, they're stronger than they look. That once they dry, they won't continue to disintegrate. They have heft to them. They'll keep, you know. And these are also blind embossed. The only difference from the red, which is like of love and passion and anger in the body, to the black is where that repeating refrain falls. So can you help me to find my people is not at the top, this kind of category of the classified ad. It's actually buried somewhere in the body of the text. But the same process is true. It's only a single printing here. Am I good on time? Are we good on time? I wanted to mention the Odyssey works. Good on time. So 2017, because these feel like, in some ways, the most generative to the next body of work. So in 2017, Emily Wilson's the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. And of course, she does a bunch of interviews and she gets the same question, why do we need another translation of the Odyssey? And she's like, you didn't ask the 60 men before me that question. But she points to the first line of the Odyssey where we're trying to get a sense of who is Odysseus before we bother to read this incredibly long, epic journey home. Who is this man? And so Polytropos has been translated 36 different ways, positive to negative. The translations include, he's cunning, he's crafty, he's mischievous, he's shifty, he's tossed to and fro by fate, he's a hero. Emily Wilson finally translates that word to say, he was a complicated man. And that felt like a way to think about, this ancient story of exile and homecoming and feeling really strange among people who should feel intimate and familiar to you. All of that felt, and also that disagreement within the text, that after 400 years, we should at least know what the water was doing at the time. We should at least be able to translate that really well. There was no agreement in the text, and it also felt like a nice metaphor for that post-2016 election moment. So these two translations, comparing translations, the left is a translation from 1852. It says, what land is this? What people? What men are born here? Versus in 1980, the same Greek is translated, what country, what land is this? Who are the people that dwell in it? It's a very different question. What men are born here versus what people dwell in it? It's different questions, but they come from the same origin text. This is a detail, so you can see the work is, so I'm taking from those translations, photo transferring them onto these large Somerset sheets of paper, rewriting over that photo transfer in graphite so that the work becomes part of my hand. And also that I get to have some kind of mastery over the text by the end. And then using spit to erase everything but those opposing definitions. All of that tedious, laborious process is about control and wanting to have control over text that feels quite unwieldy and out of my grasp. But by the time all of those processes are done, that I should be master of that language, hopefully. These are two Odysseys, one from 2000, one from 2017. Tiny text. It was his homeland he missed as he paced along the whispering surf line, utterly forlorn. Verses. So weeping for his homeland, he went limping along the shore of the loud roaring sea with many a groan. We should at least know what the water was doing, right? It's like color in the dictionary shouldn't shift over time. We should be able to define that. It shifts, and so does the Odyssey. That water is tumultuous and deep-voiced, it's booming and resounding, it's loud roaring, or it's whispering, and it's deaf, and it's quiet and not resounding. There is no agreement in the text. And then this is the last series that I wanted to mention that is part of the work that's surrounding us in this space for the installation here. This work is My Destiny is in Your Hands. So the work is based on Floriography, which is the language of flowers. So this is the first time imagery re-enters my work. I could feel my shoulders go up because it makes me uncomfortable. Like I'm used to dealing with language. This is the language of flowers, but it deals with, like you need the floral imagery to make it make sense. So Floriography kind of enjoys a resurgence in 19th century Victorian England. It didn't start there, but it gets repopularized. And the idea, there's some debate about how often it was actually done or how often it was just mentioned in literature. It was probably more popular. But the idea was you had your little flower dictionary and you could send a talking bouquet to someone else. And it made the sharing of covert messages a little bit easier than having to say it out loud. So you would receive your bouquet of flowers, reference your Floriographic dictionary, flower dictionary, and see what the sender was trying to say to you. So for My Destiny is in Your Hands, let me go to the next slide because you can see a detail of the image of the flocking. So for My Destiny is in Your Hands, I took the official state flowers of the American South, translated them, and then paired them with states that my family left the South in the second wave of the Great Migration. And so the official state flowers get kind of paired together, and for me, they become kind of love letter to homeland. So I'm originally from Alabama. Alabama's official floral symbol is the camellia. And using these 19th century flower dictionaries, today like a yellow rose equals friendship, the Victorians, the camellia would translate to my destiny is in your hands. Super romantic. But then, Louisiana's iris means I burn for you. And Delaware's peach blossom means I am your captive. And so through the history of the South, like looking at our flowers, that language becomes not just love letter, it also becomes violent and indicting, right? My destiny is in your hands, that's true, and also I am your captive and I burn for you. Feels like it reveals something more about who we really are. So the work is a flocked wallpaper. This used to be more common, I was gonna say like in grandmother's homes. You would still see, like 19th century, and then up until the 1950s, it's still popular. It's becoming a little bit repopularized now, but it's like a DIY kind of thing, yeah. But it's crushed fabric. It has the feel of crushed velvet that's screen printed onto the wallpaper, and then the wallpaper is adhered to the wall. And so the flowers, they have that embossed like quality. They also have the softness of a velvet fabric. And so like the blind emboss, they kind of beg to be touched. They want to be touched, to be understood. This is a detail image from Meet Me by Moonlight, which is the work here. So, sorry, let me backtrack. So My Destiny is in Your Hands. This work has to cover 800 square feet so that there's always 300 camellia petals visible. It's a way to memorialize the number of lynchings in Alabama post-Reconstruction. So it is love letter and it's indictment. Meet Me by Moonlight is a different, it is still about migration, but the flowers shift in order to, they are, I think, half native flowers to the South, and then half variations of the national flower, which is the rose. So Meet Me by Moonlight is one translation of one of the roses included. It also has to cover about 800 square feet. Although the nature of the room shifts, it has to cover that amount of space because I want there to be visible at least 500 kind of repetitions of those native flowers. So in the beginning of the Great Migration, 500 people a day were fleeing the South. 500 people a day, which changes not only the landscape of the South, but also all of the places that we moved. That you change the landscape of the place you left and the places that you settle. And so you change, our shared national history. So it is a combination of those southern wildflowers and also the rose, the national flower. Last work I wanted to show you, switching from this white flocking to black. This work is I Cling to You in Sunshine and in Shade. Such good language. This is actually, So it's a botanical kind of index of all the flowers from the Odyssey. So this ancient text of exile and homecoming, of fleeing and returning and feeling like you don't belong in the place that you have returned to, as Odysseus does in Book 13, when he stands on the shoreline of his own country after 10 years of weeping on every wrong shoreline, and he doesn't recognize the place. And again, that felt like a really good metaphor for that post-election moment. And so I read through the Odyssey, trying to make an index of all those flower images. I Cling to You in Sunshine and Shade is actually a translation of ivy. I think the cotton shrub is, I'm not gonna remember. Far from the One Who Is Loved, I think, is the lotus, which has a particular resonance in the Odyssey. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that the floral imagery here is actually pulled from the Alabama Herbarium Consortium. So this attempt to kind of categorize and index all the native flowers of Alabama, but they're also dried flowers and they're pressed. And so they have that kind of, sentimental, mournful quality that I think works really well for the work. That's a little bit of everything, but I think included in there is gives context for a lot of what's surrounding us for America Hymnal. Sure. So I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That was terrific. And, thank you for having such terrific work, I guess. It's really, when I came to see the show, it was moving to stand in this space, right? And that for me, that's why I view art, right? As I visit, or I get to go to a place and I have the opportunity to be moved there and to be transported. And I guess I kind of, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about that's probably not how you felt as you were making the work. And could you talk a little bit about how you feel while you're making these things?
Yeah, especially this work, which all came after the election, I think I was trying to make sense of the moment. And so I make all the work for myself.
Sure.
America Hymnal, I think, encapsulates that moment pretty well. And what it gave for me, or the making of the work, what it did for me was the realization that we've never been in agreement. At best, we get 51%. We're on the right side of history. Most of the time, most of our history, we've been on the wrong side. And it falls apart. We get really good at something and then it falls apart again. And that will be cyclical. And so something about that was kind of, was like a terrible relief. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like repeating the mistakes of the past. There's some kind of relief in being able to trace back the origins of something terrible. So at least if you know where it came from, you're a little bit more willing to struggle against it, to possibly overcome it. And it's also such an utter disappointment at the same time to keep doing the same things over and over again. So the hymnal gave me that.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, you do the same things over and over again to produce this work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Oh, there's no resolution, or at least I'm not offering any resolution in the work.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah.
I hope.
No, that sort of struck me when I was looking, because it's laser engraved, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me, because to me that's kind of, it's the reverse of a printer, right? It's a subtractive printer as opposed to adding ink to the page. Do you come from a printmaking background, or?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, and when I've worked with printmakers, I'm usually doing something wrong that I shouldn't be doing in the printmaking world. It's a very, I think of it as a very kind of fastidious kind of practice, with a lot of perfect kind of implemented, well-worn grooves in it.
Sure.
It's not the way I work, but I learn what I need to in order to do a piece or a series. Printmaking is not my background. Yeah, so I learned what I needed to do for the blind emboss. But I think if a printmaker ever joined me in the studio again, they'd be like, you're doing it all wrong and you're probably messing up the press at the same time. And the laser cutter, I know from experience, you can burn 10 pages at a time without setting the book on fire and having to get the fire extinguisher out. Like, you know, I think people who would, who work in a particular medium more often know how to do it well. I just learn enough to be able to make a piece usually.
Sure, but there's something in that, right? There's like that tension between like instinct and methodology, and it does seem like even though you're maybe working with really disparate media, like you have that, a lot of the media that you're choosing are very methodical. You know, are very, you know, you have that repetition compulsion, you might call it.
I like a little pain in the word. I like the way that we're both laughing about that. I think it says something, but it does feel like there used to be a limitation in the, you know, the works that I was rewriting, the text, the red panels, they used to be chalkboards. The limitation would be I'll write this until my hand hurts and that's how I know it's done. And I can be done with it and let go of it. There is often like repetition leads to transcendence. Repeat a thing so many times. It becomes sacred. It also can lose all meaning, and it can be a kind of an intentional inflicting of pain.
Right.
And that all of those feel really valuable. Yeah.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, you must know more about My Country 'Tis of Thee than like 99.9% of people, right?
I can tell you, maybe, but I can also tell you like the performances of it, if you were to sit here for 3 hours, that tune becomes a nightmare. At like 2.5 hours. It's terrible.
It's not what you listen to on your ride home.
Oh my God. But then at you know, right before the 4th hour, it comes back to you.
Sure.
I think it becomes sacred again. Sometimes.
Right.
Please.
No, I don't know. I was thinking about it, you know, when I was thinking about sort of the relationship between your pieces and Jacob Lawrence's pieces, and like I felt a connection both in the way you both play with visibility and like what's said and what's unsaid, because I felt that very clearly in his panels, but also like just the amount of historical research that you both, you know, put into your pieces. Like he spent 5 years at the New York Public Library, right? Just like making, like just doing a deep dive. And I mean, can you talk a little bit about how historical research, like are you like a deep diver, or do you like select your one thing, or?
It depends. So I did, what did I do? The Birmingham News piece that I did, it's cover pages of the Birmingham News newspaper from 1963. So in 63, the editorial board of the paper decided not to publish any civil rights stories on their cover pages.
Cool.
It's weird, for fear of inciting violence, ironically. And so they would either bury those pages inside and report on them very stenographically. So it'd be like facts and figures, no interviews of people who were involved in the demonstrations. They might do that, and then on their cover pages, they would fill them with Sophia Loren is sick in bed and can't get to her movie shoot. Or they send a reporter to the zoo, and there is, I swear, during the spring campaign, when you get these, you know, now iconic images of the children's marches and arrests, filling the jails, police dogs and fire hoses, like those photographs filled the New York Times, the Washington Post, I think even the Montgomery Advertiser. Birmingham, where it's happening, they send a reporter to the zoo, and that gets the above the fold, big font headline and photographs. That's the news of the day.
Right.
And so for that work, I had to go through is it microfilm or microfiche of the Birmingham News from 63, and pull out pages that felt like they were something really violent happening that day that is not being reported on. That's the kind of archival research I like. It makes me feel like Julia Roberts in the Pelican Brief. Yeah. I like that kind of silent, just looking for the patterns.
Right.
and the repetition that happens in the archive, or what's not there.
Sure, and
Yeah.
you know, I've done like I spent a lot of time with archival research, and I found it really addictive, and it really is like what's not happening just as much as what is happening when you're reading a piece and you kind of you have a sense of how things panned out after that, right?
Yeah.
Like not a complete sense because we don't know what's coming, but you do have like this like moment of like, wow, I can't believe that this is being presented to me this casually.
It's fascinating. Right? And how we shape that with language, how we shape the world through the language that we use.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, I felt that like sort of seen and unseen, said and unsaid, you know, very intimately with the wallpaper pieces, right? Where it's like that's so much more about like the human to human connection and the sort of, you know, they're almost invisible, these flowers, this wallpaper, right? Whereas, you know, you mentioned like your grandma's house, like I associate wallpaper with being like a very like brightly colored decorative object, and it really reinforces to me that these flowers were serving a different and more urgent purpose. So.
I like that. And I hope that they also feel like they're part of the structure.
Oh yeah.
That they're not just applied, that there's something very institutional about their presence.
Right.
The same with the blind emboss, you know, whether it's the classified ads or the Ferguson report, that there's something very, they are embedded
Oh yeah.
in who we are and in our past.
How long have you always been working with historical research in your work?
Yeah, I think the Ferguson report was the first, maybe only time that I've used something that was much more current,
Sure.
which made me really uncomfortable. I like things with the historical distance.
Right.
For that fact that you mentioned, that you have some historical distance from the moment to make sense of it. When it just happened, it feels
Right.
like there is no agreement in how we are contextualizing this thing, and also the language that we've agreed to use about it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a huge uncertainty.
Yeah.
Colossal.
And so there's nothing to disagree with or to like
Right.
point out. It's very uncertain.
Of course. Yeah, I was wondering about that because you know, we're in this cultural moment now where, you know, many institutions, I assume the Phillips included, you know, have been sort of confronting their cultural legacy of racism and oppression. But you must have been sort of working with American history for, you know, over 10 years now. And I guess I was wondering how you felt about the shift in attention.
In the museum specifically, or
Yeah,
just culturally?
just
all of
culturally.
us? Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of a question about, does it feel like we're on the right track, or is
Right.
are we heading in the right direction? And that there's some kind of hopeful question, usually at the end, at the last like few talks I've done. And I would like to be the artist who gives hope. I'm usually on a panel with like other artists who are giving the hope. I'm like, I don't know. But that also feels like, let me take my artist hat off, because I would like to offer no resolution in the work and like put on the hat of citizen. As citizen, I hope we can do this better. I hope that we're going to pass voting rights legislation. That's
Sure.
my big hope. But I'm not in any way certain. Like, if anything that the Hymnal has reminded me was like, at best, and the audio piece too, at best, there's like 3 moments of harmony in the audio work when you get to hear everybody, almost everybody, on the same page. It's really rare. I wanted to say a cuss word. It's really rare. It doesn't happen often. And usually we are on the wrong side collectively. But there are moments when we get it right.
Sure.
All that to say, I don't particularly feel hopeful. I don't feel optimistic. But like the Hymnal, hope is something about faith. I guess I choose to hope because I would like this world and this country to be better for the people that I love.
Right. Yeah. You want to you want to opt in and like fake the hope a little bit because you don't want to be the unhopeful person, right?
No. I'm not optimistic. I would, oh God, I don't know how to answer that question. I wish there was like another panelist here who was like on the hopeful side. I don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't have an answer in mind and probably should have provided you with some stuttering.
Let me be the like voice of pessimism in the work. There is no resolution in the work, and I can't offer it either. I'm not sure that it won't all fall apart. It's very possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure, but I mean, if we can't set the expectation, not the grandstand, but we can't set the expectation of resolution for artists, right?
Sure.
Because I mean, otherwise, artists would be our politicians, and cool, but like not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Let there be a little tension in the work, because that's what it feels like right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, just checking. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. There are 100 versions of My Country 'Tis of Thee?
There's more.
There are more.
More. Also Star Spangled Banner. I also did a project for Davidson College looking through their archives. There's also 100 versions of Dixie, which is a terrible song.
Yeah, sure.
Terrible song. That will not become a hymnal because that would be to make it re-sacred. But I made a different piece that was more about its destruction or its kind of lineage of destruction all the way up until 2020.
Right.
But it used to be a really common early American practice. If we all know the melody, if we share that in common, then I can kind of do this call and response to give you the new lyrics. Or it's also for economical printing. Like I don't have to print the sheet music. I can be cheaper, and just print new lyrics for you, for us all. And so there's a lot of early songbooks, songsters that just have, it'll say like tune, My Country 'Tis of Thee, and then totally different lyrics in support of prohibition.
Right.
Those are super dramatic, melodramatic, and it's a lot of like, drink more water to the tune of My Country 'Tis of Thee. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Is one of your included ones God Save the Queen? I was curious about that.
There are a few that predate the Francis Smith's writing of My Country 'Tis of Thee.
Sure.
Because I think the melody is actually the anthem for 6 other countries, including the UK. Yeah, it predates.
That's great. I think we have like one more minute before some questions. Do you have any upcoming projects that you want to tell us about? quickly?
Yes, I have at the Frist Museum, which is ongoing. It's closing, I think, on September 12th, and I'll go there for the day for a performance. So we're going to do 100 versions of the Star Spangled Banner. I'm hoping that it'll be utter chaos, kind of controlled chaos with a little bit of those harmonious moments. But I'm working with a really lovely choir director there and choir, and one of my my only rule was I want the piece to end on dissonance, that the audience cannot leave having heard that song 100 times feeling hopeful and optimistic, that it has to be reflective of this moment. And so the most chaotic moment should come right at the end. And then we all just have to go back out into the world. Yeah.
That sounds terrific. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. Should we check and see if there are any questions?
We have one question about what is the longest that any one person sang. I think it might be a reference to the American hymnal piece here. It wasn't specified.
Recording, for the recording of the piece, oh gosh, it took about 5 hours for each singer to sing all 100 versions. In person, the first one that I did performances was in Miami at Locust Projects. It was an open call, and so anybody could come and sing for 30 minutes. You just sign up and sang for 30 minutes. A lot of people were great singers. There were a couple that weren't. It was really uncomfortable. But 30 minutes each. But I mentioned that uncomfortable singing because I think that also was part of the good work, the goodness of it. That like we don't all sound great, that part of it should fall apart and sound terrible. I think this one singer did it on purpose. But I'm glad she did, looking back, because it should sound like a nightmare.
Like
At
American
least a
Idol
little
audition.
It was terrible. And then, other than that, about an hour per singer in person. That was at Mee's Chapel. They each sung for an hour. In the middle of a torrential thunderstorm, and the piece ended right at midnight, so we all silently went back out into the world.
I had a question. Is there a spiritual quality? Because I think your Presbyterian background is coming back to me, and I loved your story about the 48-hour readings. I mean, how do you see that playing into your practice?
Yeah, I think of a love of the word comes from that, from growing up in a, well, like you could say the church, but I'll say for me in that Presbyterian church, which very much super liberal, especially for Montgomery, Alabama, and super progressive. And there was a love of the word there. Presbyterians are not known for being good singers. We keep it real tight. We don't move around a lot. Usually the clapping is a little bit off, but the love of the word is there. And that also comes from the love of the word. It comes from my mother as well. Like, how do you make the word? Teju Cole did this interview where he talked about that we all need a lot of help, and he's just talking like collectively here, humanity needs a lot of help, and where he's found the most help is in the most sacred text. And those aren't always religious and spiritual, it's included, but it's also in our poetry and in our literature and in Homer and in the Odyssey. And he makes particular mention of the Odyssey. That these secular texts, because we share them and because they still have this incredibly treasureful space among us, that can also be sacred. That singing the worst parts of ourselves, that like singing the Confederate versions next to the abolitionist versions, that even when it's terrible, it's still worthy of being sung back into the world. There's something really complicated about that I think is not easy and it's not pleasant, but it does feel like an attempt to have faith in something. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mollye, if you had any final thoughts, I think.
You must be a voracious reader.
A little bit. The pandemic was not good for my reading brain, but sometimes.
Do you have anything you're reading right now?
I'm reading translations of the Aeneid.
Oh, cool.
Oh, really? Okay, I like that response. I'm comparing those translations now. So that's not like fun reading, it's work reading. Yeah.
Still, that's really cool.
What about you?
The last book I read was called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. It's by George Saunders, and it's like he teaches in the MFA program for writing in, I think at SUNY, and he teaches these 5 Russian short stories, and so he like dissects each one, you know, in the novel and talks about how it relates to his journey as a writer and how he teaches it, and it's just been really, I really loved it, and it, you know, as someone who struggles thinking about how to teach and how to effectively teach, you know, it felt like intimate but also sort of instructive.
I like that. Tell me the title one more time.
It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain.
That's also a good title.
Yeah, right?
Good.
Well, we have just enjoyed our time with you, and I just want to remind our wonderful audience that this wonderful installation of Bethany's is on view here through September 19th as part of our Jacob Lawrence Struggle Series show. So if you haven't, I hope you'll come and see it for yourselves in person or see it again and again. It certainly warrants repeat. Or if you make it to Crystal Bridges, there'll be a variation there, as we've learned. But really, thank you so much, Bethany and Mollye, for being with us, and thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.